It's no secret that 2023 was a devastating year for Disney at the box office, and as a result, there's been a lot of shakeups with the company since the start of the year. Back in February, it was announced that the longstanding president of Walt Disney Motion Picture Studios, that's the division of the company that's responsible for their live action movies and all these live action remakes that they're doing. Well, he was fired. And then back in April, it was announced that Marvel is laying off 15% of their staffers. And this is definitely an indicator that things have been going bad for them because they've been trying to say that things are fine with the company and they're just restructuring. But companies don't tend to restructure as in they're downsizing if things are going good for them. And we have since learned that basically everything that they've been putting out in the last several years has been a failure for them, at least theatrically, it's been a failure. The closest thing they had to a success is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, but even then, recent reporting coming out about that suggests that the only reason you can actually consider that profitable is if you actually count Disney paying itself to license it for streaming service on their own platform. So I really don't consider that profitable when Disney's essentially just paying themselves. But now we got some other news talking about restructuring at the company, or at least that's what they're calling it. I'm calling it downsizing because they're spending too much money on their properties. And that's this latest news that Pixar is laying off a huge chunk of their staffers as well. Today, leadership at the storied company that traces its origins to the late Steve Jobs and was bought by Disney in 2006 will notify employees of the reduction. The Hollywood Reporter has learned it is the biggest restructuring in Pixar history, although top leadership isn't impacted. And that's kind of the sad part about all this is that the top leadership is not being affected by this decision because ultimately it's the choices that they made that put the company in this situation to begin with, but they never have to suffer the consequences of those decisions. Instead, that's being passed along to the lowly workers at the company who really have no say so and just have to do what they're told. Approximately 14% of Pixar's workforce, or around 175 employees, will be let go before the reduction. Approximately 1,300 people worked at the animation studio. The layoffs are part of Disney chief Bob Iger's overarching mandate to return to a focus on quality versus churning out content for streaming, which was a priority for his short-lived successor, Bob Chapek. Can people stop acting like Bob Chapek was actually responsible for all this stuff? I'm not necessarily trying to defend the guy, but it's just ridiculous at this point that people are acting like Bob Iger wasn't in charge of the company during the years that Bob Chapek was officially the CEO. And I say officially the CEO because Bob Iger was still in charge of the company. The only reason he actually stepped down as CEO is because he got tipped off that things were going to be shut down as a result of the pandemic. So he wanted to be out of there, so he wasn't responsible for all that, or at least he wasn't the face of all the problems that they're going to have during the upcoming economic downturn. But while he was gone, they created a position called executive chairman that was supposed to be Bob Iger overseeing the transition between his reign as CEO and Bob Chapek's reign as CEO. But that was extended up until the point where Bob Iger essentially came back to the company. And during that whole time period, Bob Iger still maintained the CEO office at Disney. So everyone working behind the scenes, or at least the leaks we've heard behind the scenes, was saying that Bob Iger was still the CEO of the company and Bob Chapek was pretty much just their fall guy during that whole situation. Pixar employees have known since January that layoffs were coming. If there's some solace to be had, it's that reductions are less than 20% reported in January by some news outlets, nor is Pixar being singled out. Well, I'm sure that's very reassuring. You get told you're losing your job and they have this to say. We know you're losing your job, but don't worry because the layoffs are less severe than we thought it was going to be a few months ago. And also, other departments are having massive layoffs too, so you're in good company. The article goes on to talk about how some of the other studios that Disney owns were experiencing massive layoffs last year and this year, or restructuring as they call it, because companies restructure and downsize when things are successful, or at least Disney would try to say that, yes, things are successful for them and they're doing just fine, but typically a company won't be contracting when it's doing well. They'd be expanding. So Disney would be like the first major company in the world that would be contracting while they're doing well, but at least that's what they say. And I guess there's some people out there who will believe it, or at least just carry the water for them because they don't want to admit that Disney has been a failure in this last few years. But anyway, the reason that they actually got delayed for Pixar is because they have some bigger movies coming up like Inside Out 2, Toy Story 5. So they needed people to work on for that, which isn't that just a kick in the balls right there where it's like, yeah, we need you to work on these big movies that are supposed to get us out of this rut, but then we're going to fire you after your work is done for this. But I mean, they said they knew for some time that the layoffs were coming, but they never said who it was going to impact. So I guess the employees were just trying to keep their heads down and just do a good job. And hope that it would actually just pass them by, which is pretty cruel way to actually treat your employees, if you ask me, saying like, yeah, some of you are going to get fired, but we're not going to say who, so you better do good job. And people are just going to try to keep their head down. It's like, oh, I better work hard or whatever. Otherwise I'm going to be out on the chopping block like that. It's like, that's kind of cruel in my opinion. The once invincible animation studio suffered a major setback during the pandemic era when the Chapek regime decided to send Luca, Soul, and Turning Red straight to Disney Plus, even though cinemas had begun to reopen or were in full recovery mode. This is them once again blaming Bob Chapek for something that was likely Bob Iger's call, because Bob Iger really wanted to push the Disney Plus platform, so he's likely the one that was making the decisions, even if Bob Chapek was officially the CEO at the time. But still, I have no proof of that, so we'll just say that this was Bob Iger's call. But even then, it's not like these movies would have been successful, because if you actually look at the box office for movies that's come out since then, they've been pretty big failures. The only two we've had are Lightyear and Elemental. Those were failures, and some people will say Elemental was a success. And granted, it did a lot better than the opening weekend suggested it was going to do. I think that was the lowest one for Pixar opening ever. So people were surprised when it actually had some legs underneath it. But the movie was only success if you assume that Disney spent $0 to market the movie, and you also count the revenue that they got by licensing it to themselves on the Disney Plus platform, which I personally don't think that's the movie making money, when Disney's just basically paying itself to show it on its own platform. And that really is a big reason, I think, why a lot of the Pixar movies coming out in recent years haven't been as successful, because Disney's kind of conditioned their audience to wait to watch it. Because you can spend a lot of money, especially a movie like this, family movies. Usually those were kind of a sure thing. You take the kids out, but now it's gotten to the point where if you family of four wanted to go out to the movies, concessions and everything like that, you're looking at over $100 for an evening out with the family, which yes, people still do that, but that's not just like a small thing. I mean, that's a pretty big expense for a lot of people. So most people are looking at that and thinking like, well, do I want to take the kids out this weekend, or do I want to just wait a couple months and then we can just watch it at home on Disney Plus or something like that? And I think a lot of people are doing that. And that's something a lot of people have addressed, that the streaming platforms have more or less helped kill the box office. And the only way theaters and studios can recover and start making money at the box office again would be if they start delaying the release on Disney Plus platform or other streaming platforms, that instead of what they're doing now, which is like, yeah, you can watch it now or wait a month or two and then watch it on streaming at home or something like that. Is Disney capable of making those changes? I'm not personally sure. And this wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing for them if they're making a lot of money on Disney Plus, but subscriber growth has been pretty bad for Disney Plus. They've been losing subscribers, so they've been forced to try to find other ways to make money from the subscribers they have, whether it's inserting ads or hiking the prices. I think it was like a couple times within a year that they hiked the prices on it. So I don't know whether they're going to actually be successful with Inside Out 2, because the first movie that they had that came out 2015, $850 million on a $175 million budget. I'm thinking this one will probably be similar to recent Pixar movies where it's around $200 million budget range. It might be the same, but we'll see. But I don't think it's going to do no $850 million. I think what's going to happen is maybe like $500 million range, moderately successful, because Inside Out 1 was popular, but Disney has lost a lot of goodwill with audiences and particularly families since the first one came out. So that backlash might reflect Inside Out 2, as it's reflected pretty much everything that Disney's put out in the last couple of years. So I don't know. I don't think it's a sure thing that Inside Out 2 is going to be the big movie that kind of digs them out of this rut, which is why I'm thinking they're laying off a lot of people now, because if they're expecting something big to hit like Inside Out 2, then you would think that they would maintain the workforce they have in order to produce other stuff moving forward. But all indicators suggest that Disney doesn't have a whole lot of confidence in this movie. And I think that's also reflected in that there's not a whole lot of buzz surrounding it. There's not hate surrounding it. There's just a lot of indifference to this. And I think that's the best that Disney can hope for in this current climate, is people just they would rather people are just kind of indifferent to them as opposed to outright hostile towards them, which is what happens to Disney the other half of the time. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think Inside Out 2 is going to be that shining beacon on the hill for Pixar and Disney, or do you think it's just going to kind of come and go and maybe even just be a flop, or at best a moderate success. And if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest in entertainment news. And don't forget to like and share the video because it helps out with the channel. Thank you.